So there's this argument. It happens a lot in the outside world, also a lot in my head. And the argument runs something like this. Coercive gendering is bad, right? It's oppressive, it sucks. It's bad for trans people, of course. It's also bad for folks who don't identify as trans, but are non-normatively gendered in one way or another. And, you know, on the one hand, this includes a female-assigned butch who binds all the time, packs all the time, wears her hair short, and sleeps with women. On the other hand, it can apply, under the right circumstances, to a sorority girl who likes to watch football. It also, I think, applies universally to anybody who's feminine in any way ever. There is, although it's contextual and heavily policed, a right way to do masculinity. And if you do masculinity the right way, you're very seldom punished for it, in my experience. Now, if you do masculinity in what you think is the right way and it's the wrong way for a given context, then you might be. And doing it the wrong way can be very much about something you can't alter, like your body or your race. And doing masculinity the right way can be its own punishment, which is something that I've referenced in other videos. Frankly, the way that men are supposed to handle things like emotion and intimacy is pretty punishing. But even with all of that said, doing femininity the right way, the perfect way for a given context, can still get you punished precisely for doing femininity the right way. So coercive gendering, it's bad. It's bad for lots of people. It's probably even bad, I think we can safely say, for a majority of people. And of course the other piece of it that's bad is, aside from the punishment for doing gender the wrong way, there's also this whole set of expectations about what is the right way given the genitals you were born with, or the genitals that doctors gave you shortly after birth because your genitals didn't conform to the way that you were supposed to be gendered. And that's harmful too, you know. Just the simple expectation can be harmful in and of itself, when it doesn't apply to someone's identity or own deepest sense of self, or just what makes them happy. So coercive gendering is bad. Most of us, I think, can probably agree to that. That may be a large assumption. Coercive gendering is bad. I agree to that. I hope that you do too. And the solution is we should get rid of binary gender. I have, for as long as I can remember, had a sense that this was not the right answer. My earliest sense that this was not the right answer came from a conservative direction, which was, you know, binary gender is real and essential and seamless and biologically based, and of course we shouldn't get rid of it. Why would we do that? What a terrible idea. Over time, of course, my understanding of gender has evolved a bit, but I still feel pretty strongly that this is not the right answer. And my first basis for that feeling, post-conservatism, was largely experiential. I found that an awful lot of people, from a progressive standpoint, often talking about it as a feminist imperative, but sometimes from other angles as well, were making a lot of assertions and a lot of demands about how I was allowed to embody my own gender, how others were allowed to embody their own gender, and I found it kind of problematic. And on the other hand, it was something that I considered, right? I thought for a long time about whether I should really start testosterone. You know, does hormonal transition, in fact, mean that I'm sort of being self-hating, or that I hate women, or that I'm abandoning feminist work because I could be this really cool, non-normative, masculine woman, and instead I'm just going to be a guy. And the way that I kind of reasoned my way through that, or past that, was to really think, okay, is the best way to advocate for a particular community really to go on pretending that I'm a member of that community even though I'm not, and to speak for that community as if I'm a member of it even though I'm not? I mean, if we were talking about any other marginalized group, the bizarreness of asserting that that someone should pretend to be a part of that group so that they can more effectively advocate for that group, I think would be transparent. And in most circumstances, you know, if we were talking about religion, if we were talking about ethnicity, you wouldn't tell a white guy to go and advocate in blackface because that's a more effective, you know? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't say you're a racist because you won't put on blackface to work on anti-racist initiatives. Like, that would be a completely bizarre and inappropriate and screwed up thing to do. And so there is this inherent transphobia to the assertion that one should not transition because it reifies binary gender, because really what it's saying is, well, no, really you're a woman, and you're betraying your womanhood by transitioning. And so in this really strange, backhanded, complicated way, the argument against binary gender becomes an argument in support of binary gender, because you can't transition, because if you transition you're upholding binary gender, because really you're a woman, right? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that regard. The other angle that I came from was more of a rational one, and I've kind of touched on it a little bit already in sort of drawing an analogy to race or to ethnicity. And on the one hand, I'm always hesitant to make comparisons between different axes of identity and privilege and oppression, because fundamentally they're not the same, right? Race is not the same thing as gender, but oppression is oppression, and marginalization is marginalization, and I do think that often they operate according to similar tenets, and using similar structures, and so I think there are places where it's appropriate and reasonable to draw analogies. And I think that this is one of them. You know, in talking about race, in talking about racism, often early on in either an individual's or a society's sort of evolution of thought on the subject, the first place that people who are progressive or standing in solidarity go is frequently, well, what we need to do is just not see race, or get rid of race, right? And so people will say, full of good intention, well, I don't see race, you know, I don't even notice that about people. Oh, you mean my friend is black? I had no idea my friend was black. Oh, 97% of my friends are white? Well, I didn't have any idea that that was the case because I just don't see race, right? And if you listen when folks make assertions of not seeing race, it usually is being used as a way to get off the hook for something that is, or at least is perceived as, racist. The other issue with this, though, is that it sets up this expectation whereby the standard for not being racist is not seeing race, right? And what that means is that you have just stripped anybody who's not a member of the majority group of language for talking about their experience, right? Because if I come to you now and say, well, I'm not white and I'm being oppressed because of that, well, I see race, right? By making that assertion, I've just proven to you that I see race, and people who see race are racist, and therefore I'm being a racist. And so I'm dismissed, and my experience is dismissed, and this is where you get all of this nonsense about, you know, anybody who perceives racism in their treatment, in their experience, is being a reverse racist, right? Because they see race, and if you see race, you're a racist. And I think that the same thing happens a lot around gender, and it happens in conversations around feminism, around women's issues, where you have guys who get really, really, really upset that women would assert that, you know, male privilege exists, which it does. It's complicated, but it does exist. And I'm here to say that as somebody who has lived as a woman and as a man, and really hasn't seen a whole lot of other change in my life circumstances. Male privilege does exist. Although it is very complicated, especially if you're, you know, trans, or of color, or of a minority religious or ethnic group. or mentally ill, or disabled, or etc., etc., etc. So, male privilege, complicated, mitigated by lots of other things, but it does exist. And you get the same kind of pushback often from men about, well, if what you want is equality, then what that means is we have to not see gender, we have to not talk about gender, and if we see gender, if we talk about gender, even if we're just talking about gender in order to discuss an instance of, or a broader social issue with sexism or misogyny, well then you're being sexist, which means I can discount what you're saying, or reverse sexist, I hear that occasionally. And there's something very similar here happening with the idea of binary gender, right? Binary gender is oppressive, and so we need to get rid of it. Binary gender's bad. And the way we're going to get rid of it is by stripping it from the verbal and expressive repertoire of the people who are the most marginalized by it. So we're going to say to trans people, your expression of binary gender is oppressive, your expression of binary gender is patriarchal, your expression of binary gender is misogynist, either because as a trans man you're saying that men are better, or that being a woman isn't good enough, or that you're not really a woman, or because as a trans woman you're pretending to be a woman, you're being deceptive, you're betraying womanhood, you're appropriating women's bodies and experiences. But I never hear the same argument being made to cisgender people. Now, I hear sometimes arguments being made that cisgender people should be less emphatically gendered or more gender neutral. Mostly that's kind of a 70s feminist thing, and I don't hear it a lot from contemporary writers, contemporary activists, although I do hear milder versions, which I think are sometimes appropriate, to the effect that, you know, if you want to be a macho dude and work out at a gym all day, that's cool. If you want to be a macho dude, work out at the gym all day, and then go home and beat your wife, that's not so cool. So there's some room for that. But where I see it being problematic is where the critique is being made uniquely addressed to trans people. Because I hear people saying to trans people, well, you shouldn't have these secondary sex characteristics, you know, you shouldn't have facial hair, your voice shouldn't drop, you shouldn't pursue surgeries, trans women shouldn't pursue facial surgeries that are feminizing because they're just going to end up reifying these totally unrealistic feminine beauty ideals that pervade our society and oppress women, and on and on and on. And I just want to say, you know, unless you're walking up to cisgender women and saying, you know, really I think you should probably go on low-dose testosterone because otherwise your appearance is sort of upholding these unrealistic ideals of feminine beauty. Unless you're going to go to cisgender men and say, you know, I think really maybe you should consider, like, penis reduction and breast implants because right now your body is just not sufficiently androgynous, and I think you're kind of exemplifying this harmful example of patriarchy and normatively masculine bodies. Unless you're going to do that, this, again, is the same kind of buried transphobia, where what you're actually saying to trans men, to trans women, is binary gender is okay for those of us who have a real gender. Binary gender is only a problem for you because you're choosing this. You're not really this, you're just pretending. You can give up the physical manifestation of your gender identity, even though it would be unreasonable to ask the same thing from me. So that's how I feel about getting rid of binary gender, at least as it is expected and demanded of trans folks who are interested in one trapping or another of binary gender. I think that coercive gendering is wrong and harmful, and I think that that's true whether it's a case of insisting that you have to be a male-assigned, male-identified, male-bodied man, or a female-assigned, female-bodied, female-identified woman, and there are no other options, or whether you're saying that none of those options are even on the table, you can't have any of that language or any of that expressive potential anywhere in your gender identity. I think they're both bad.